I don't know if there was anything specific that you wanted to do. I'm sure we can.
Absolutely not. Sorry.
Jesus, big enough
That's the kind of water bottles you get here in Spain.
I mean,
it's a good
sign. You distorted your background. It was so nice.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Provision. Today we have a great episode for you, talking about strategy setting in the context of early stage companies with Rogan from the ProFounders team, and today's special guest, Bernhard Niesner. Bernhard is the CEO and co-founder of Busuu. At ProFounders, we're lucky to have invested early stage into Busuu, and as a result, I've had the opportunity to work with the brilliant Bernhard and also the excellent rest of team at Busuu as they've grown the business to where it is today. The world's largest community for language learning, providing courses in 12 different languages on the web and mobile to over 100 million people worldwide. Given all your first-hand experience in the trenches, we're super excited to chat to you today about strategy setting. So thanks very much for your time, Bernhard.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Great. As before, we'll be throwing up a clock and trying to limit the answers to 90 seconds. But as with other guests, I'm happy to give you a little bit of leeway to run into extra time. So without further ado, I'll get the ball rolling. We're talking about strategy in the context of early stage companies. And the first question we have is, I guess, a bit of a soul searching question from an early stage founder. As an early stage founder, I feel like I'm being pulled in hundreds of different directions. Bernhard, are there any frameworks that you use to help you figure out what to focus on or where to focus your decision making and your strategy on?
Well, I mean, I can tell this early stage founder that unfortunately, even as a late stage founder, you still will be dragged into different directions. So unfortunately, that will never stop. Having said that, I've recently tried a new approach to that, which is the very famous and already a bit old Eisenhower matrix, which is a 2x2 matrix of important and urgent. So there are things that are important and urgent, which you should do immediately. There are things that are important and not urgent that actually you should plan in the future. And I use then my calendar to put this in. There are things that are not important and urgent, which actually you should delegate. And even as an early stage founder, you really need to be very careful of where you spend your time. So you must then find someone else in your team to actually do it. And if it's not urgent and not important, then you shouldn't be doing it at all. And that's a framework that I've been using recently. I have actually my Trello board where all the new stuff comes in. I make an assessment of where it falls into this matrix, and then I act accordingly.
Actually, Bernhard, it's quite interesting. I guess this is relatively new, but do you think, we've been on a long journey together, that you've done stuff that was not urgent and not important and kind of regretted it? Or was there times when you've done stuff which was not important and not urgent and it turned out to be actually quite a good thing to do?
Yeah, probably both, I would say. But I guess over the time, ideally, you need to get better at that, and you need to be very careful of where you spend your time. And I guess, as you probably alluded to, like, you need to improve your judgment of these things. And I guess as an early stage founder, very often you might be dragged into different things, maybe let it be PR or what a competitor is doing, or maybe what an investor is telling you to do. And I think the older you get and the more you're into the business, I think you refine your senses and you sharpen your sense and judgment of, how important it really is. And whether it's really urgent or it can actually wait a few more days.
You talk about judgment there and how that's grown and perhaps it's improved over time. A question here on another kind of longitudinal thing and whether it's changed over time. Typically, I guess early stage companies that we speak to are focused on similar sorts of stuff: product market fit, finding marketing channels, etc. As the business has grown, have you been focusing on different things? Does that change, or do you still end up focusing on the same thing throughout the kind of life cycle of the business?
No, I think your focus has to change whether you're early stage or later stage. I mean, early stage, I basically had been doing everything from, defining long-term product strategy to buying toilet paper for the office. So I think it was a bit of a wide mix. The more mature the organization is, the more you basically can delegate. So I think I try now myself to think a little bit more longer term ahead. So let's say 6 to 12 months ahead, because I think if I'm not doing it, no one in the organization is going to do it, because we're still very much focused on execution and getting stuff done. So as a CEO, it's your job to look ahead in which direction we're actually going. So I think, yeah, there needs to be a transition from in the trenches, doing all the testing, the product yourself, to looking a little bit more into the future.
To be fair, Bernhard, buying toilet paper is probably both urgent and important. So that's that. But
if you're running out, yes.
But actually, interesting point that you just said, because yes, we were lucky enough to invest, I think, 2011. So we've been almost 10 years together.
Yeah.
And things have changed to an extent. But the one thing that I would say has never changed has been your desire to bring language learning for the right reasons to the masses. So the kind of that has never ever changed.
No, absolutely. I think that the overall vision and the direction and what we want to do, we luckily never really had to dramatically pivot. We always stayed true to the direction. But I guess of how we do that and what's my piece in doing that probably has transitioned a bit more. So maybe when you guys invested, I was still wireframing the screens of the mobile app and the front door of our registration page, and now luckily I have
and all the finance and all the marketing,
exactly,
and everything else.
But now I have a very talented team who does this much better than what I ever could do. So I think as an individual, and let's say from a founder perspective, yes, we're still going in the same direction. Absolutely, we want to bring language learning to the masses. But what I do personally on a day-to-day basis has shifted luckily a bit.
Got it. So you touch on, both of you, that you've been doing this. You've been in the trenches for almost a decade now. There's a question here, and I guess it touches to perhaps where there's a misalignment. The question was, should we be led by our North Star, or should we be led by our kind of runway cash out date in terms of what we focus on? I guess there's that question, and also perhaps it touches on a more broader, what do you do when your vision perhaps of bringing language learning to a global audience perhaps clashes with maybe an investor's vision, and how you're going about that?
Great questions. To the first, I'd say North Star versus cash. Well, first and foremost, I would say ideally your North Star leads to long-term cash in the business. If it doesn't, then the North Star is probably wrong, because you need to build a sustainable business, and ideally the North Star is a proxy metric of how you add more value to customers. And if you do that, then ideally they give you money, and then you're not running out of cash. So in our case, our North Star is weekly active learners. So how many users who actually, let's say, use the product and learn something on a weekly basis. We know if this goes up, more people will spend money on us, and therefore, we're in a good cash position. Having said that, of course, if you're constantly then running out of cash, I think there's another problem in the business. So maybe your North Star metric is actually wrong, and you need to change that. Versus investors and your own opinion, I would hope that investors back successful businesses, and therefore, again, they are interested in you doing the right things. If there is a disconnect, then I don't know, you probably need to follow your own judgment as well as a founder. But ideally, you listen to the advice to the investors to see different portfolio companies, and they can add value, hopefully. And therefore, there shouldn't be a big conflict, I would assume.
I think this is quite an important thing, so I'm going to blow through your clock and stuff. On the first one, it's quite interesting. We at Busuu have got a North Star, as you say. But do you think it's wrong, actually, for a company to have a North Star that VC investors don't necessarily buy into? It can still be a viable company. It can still be a really meaningful company, but it might not be what VCs like to invest in. I know I'm talking from the VC's point of view, but we're lucky enough to be, I think, the only VCs on your board. I'd probably say that you have more of the kind of passion for doing the right thing by business, rather than just doing whatever the VCs want.
Yeah, no, because also at the end of the day, the North Star should be something where people jump out of bed and are super excited to do that. And let's be honest, that's probably not going to be LTV to CAC ratio or payback time on your marketing spend. So therefore, it needs to be something that a junior product manager or junior marketing manager says like, wow, I'm having hundreds of thousands or millions of people using the product on a weekly basis. That's amazing. I'd love to have my impact on that. So, but ideally it helps with LTV to CAC as well. But I would be quite opposed to now having, let's say, too many financially minded investors telling me what my North Star should be, because I don't think it would fly with the team, and overall it's also not where we should go to.
Which is actually, I agree, and I think that's great. But what's interesting for me, and I think the board makeup of Busuu is different to a lot of the companies I'm on, which has genuinely kind of impassioned angels and advisors who view your vision. But what would you do if it was a bunch of slightly more financially minded people who said, Bernhard, it doesn't really matter whether you teach people or not. What matters is they pay.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate.
I've never done that to you.
To not have this type of board. I would say, well, I mean, look, I get it maybe from a financial perspective, but it's quite short-sighted because, at the end of the day, it's a long-term game, especially in ad tech. It takes time to create consumer success, and that's where it all starts. Great product, consumer success, money comes. If you put money first, it's probably not going to work. And there's all these greedy VCs just want to multiply their investments. If they're interested in that, then they should listen to the entrepreneur and their gut feeling about how to create a great product. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I think our boards are really interesting because you do have different views. They're not particularly, apart from mine, particularly financially minded. And then I think what you do very well is you take the sum of all those opinions, but you make the decision. It's never something that's been kind of ordered on and off.
That is true. But I love our heated discussion about the numbers, though, Rogan.
Well, that's because I'm dull. But,
no comment.
Thank you, VK.
Okay, cool. So actually changing tack ever so slightly, question, because now obviously you talk about the team being bigger. I wonder how many different strategic goals and objectives do you think it's possible to pursue at one point in time? And as Busuu has grown, has this scaled linearly with the team size? So as it gets bigger, are you able to pursue more things? Or do you find that actually you still need to really only focus on one or two or three or four things?
Yeah, I would go there with Steve Jobs, who said focus is about saying no. And I think, we're getting better at it, but still it's a bit hard. But look, we had so many iterations about, the OKRs and how many, and personal and company and so on. And I think where we currently landed is that there need to be a North Star, a limited set of, a few key results per area. And then each person ideally only has one key result per quarter. Because otherwise, yes, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, but there's always one ball that you shouldn't drop. And I think that laser focus is just super important. And that gives also then real clarity of what we're doing and what we're not doing. And I think that has been a positive shift in our system.
Yeah, that makes sense. But Bernhard, do you have one or multiple ones? Because you're obviously the boss, so...
Yeah, so I have two, because we have a B2C and a B2B business, and as you know, it's not always overlapping. So I try to basically have two, but it's probably not ideal. But yeah, at the moment I have two.
Cool. So actually on that point, it sounds like the team at Busuu are using OKRs and key results, and everyone sort of has a key result that they're trying to deliver on. There's a question here on sort of frequency. How often do you, because I guess you're always meant to be course correcting, how often are you reviewing those key results? How often are you reviewing the strategy and saying, okay, this might need to change?
Yeah, so strategy is being set for 5 years in advance with, let's say, a big vision of 5 years, but then a pretty, I'd say, detailed view on the next 12 to 24 months with like proper business plan and so on. It's being reviewed every 6 months. So we have a cadence of then getting together with the leadership team and do a proper strategy review where we look also on the longer term picture. The, let's say, yearly picture is being reviewed every quarter, where we do rolling forecasts and updates on how we do, and also the OKRs are being set on a quarterly cadence. Personally, I'm not a big fan of changing key results within the quarter, but sometimes it does need to happen. But I think this is all a process that needs some adjustments, and you will always have this like, who set this key result and it was impossible in the first place, and people moaning about it. But then the same person then has the chance next time to push back maybe a little bit more, have more, let's say, an active role in setting the key result. So it's a bit like top down, but it's also bottom up, and it's good to have some friction in this process.
It's something actually I'm always interested in, even in our board, but other boards, about if you set key results really low, everyone's going to meet them. Everyone's kind of happy that they've met their targets, but of course, you don't really progress the business. If you set them too high, and we've done that a couple of times, I know, then everyone gets a little bit disappointed because they don't meet their KPIs and they don't meet their bonuses or whatever. So how does one do that? And I guess the pandemic allows you to change everything on a dime, which we did at subsequent board meetings, but on a general basis.
Yeah, it's hard. And look, and maybe it's easy also to set the key result for someone, I don't know, with a conversion target who works in product, but then it becomes more complicated in finance or HR or, let's say, the office manager. So there is difficulties in this whole setting. I don't think anyone has really nailed it. But overall, they always should be a stretch targets. I mean, we're not here to play, we're here to win. It's a competitive market, and we're building hopefully an edtech unicorn and building a big business that can impact hundreds of millions of people. So that's not going to be a walk in the park journey. So therefore, it always needs to be a stretch. If ideally, therefore, also if you only get to like 80% of it, it's okay, and you can still celebrate to a certain extent. And it should be very rare that you actually overachieve, but that's fine. And I think it's just also, it always comes down to what do you actually do if you screw up, and how do you talk about it in the company, and how do you share learnings about that it didn't work out. As long as no one gets burned, in front of the company, and people still understand that they can make mistakes. You have this type of culture that it's okay to screw it up from time to time. Well, then that's fine. And then, you move on to the next quarter.
We've definitely beaten things, your targets. We're obviously, as a board, setting you too low targets. We'll have to work on that.
Oh God, I'm giving you wrong ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
You actually, a double-edged sword, Bernhard. You actually touched on something where there was a question around how do you share the learnings that you've had based on the mistakes and often things that have gone right. I know product teams have retrospectives where they look at this thing periodically across a growing organization. How do you make sure that everyone gets the information they need and that those learnings are shared?
Yeah, that's really tough, and especially now in this kind of remote setup where everything is online. Communication is absolutely the gold or the oil in the machine of the organization. So we now need to over-communicate, put much more on Slack, Confluence. We have weekly all-hands stand-ups. So yeah, I think, look, we do lunch and learns. We have people present in the all hands. I think it's all about that. It's just shouldn't be just one person always talking or presenting learnings. It needs to be shared among the team. But I also think there is some sort of responsibility within the individuals as well to make sure that we get to the right organization. Remote working is hard, and it requires this different sort of discipline. And I think, we have an amazing team, and we're super lucky in the type of culture that we have created. But I think as an individual, you're not going to be successful in this world if you just lean back and wait and consume what the company is going to present to you. You need to be proactively out there, learn, be hungry to progress, and then hopefully the company allows you to learn as much as possible.
Actually, Bernhard, do you have any kind of specific program, I've never asked this, to try to encourage people to be almost entrepreneurial within the company? So, so actually say to people, look, if you have a good idea, just share it with the whole company or something?
Yeah, we have hackathons, which we do, and I think that's a channel. But I do think now as we get bigger as well, that it would be good to have this in a more structured and more ongoing way as well. So yeah, I think there's room for improvement. So
but actually it's a balance, isn't it, between being structured and being entrepreneurial? Almost, I mean, what we've seen in some of our companies, and you're kind of going towards that now, is that when you're small, you have the advantages of nimble and lots of ideas and everybody's kind of sharing the same. Being big, sometimes you lose some of that innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, one of our actionable behaviors is to question the status quo. And I think that's an incredibly important one, because the sentence, "it has always been like that," is the first way towards the decline of an organization. So we do encourage people to really challenge and, make sure that we think differently. But I think we have a way to go. We're now also setting up tribe structures. We have squads already, which is self-sufficient autonomous teams. Now we have tribes. So I think just by organizational changes, we also allow people to just don't need to check with anyone, just do it, and then let's see what happens.
All right, cool. Bernhard, actually I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned there about being remote and trying to be proactive with lunch and learns, etc. A question here around, how do I communicate company strategy and vision to the employees in this remote environment and still make sure that they're enthused? Have you found that it's been more difficult remote to do that, and are there any strategies for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to have a consistent definition of what strategy actually is. I don't think that's actually the case in many companies. So what we say is this, I think it comes from a consulting company or so, like where to play and how to win. So you choose the area where you play, and then you define how you're going to win actually in these areas, which then also defines a lot of the stuff you're not supposed to do. And then honestly, we now put a lot of effort in company-wide strategy presentations. So there used to be things which maybe I just put a few slides together the night before and then it presented in front of 30 people. Well, that doesn't work like that anymore when you're 150 or more. So it's really now a process. It's maybe, we discuss with board, we do a leadership team retreat, we then speak with the wider management, we get some, bottom-up ideas. And probably now this takes already, 20, 30, 40 hours of really nailing a company strategy presentation. And I more and more realize that actually this is also part of my job, talking about shift of focus, right? I mean, that's then at the end of a, probably growth stage CEO, what you're really supposed to do, make sure that you communicate that. And not only you, but you give them these tools to the wider management so they can also have presentations and have the slides and all the messaging. So yeah, I think this is really a learning experience for us doing this in a remote world. I think we do it relatively well. It's a lot about communicating, repetition. And I think we're getting there.
Actually, Bernhard, I had a question, which again, I don't know the answer to, but how much do you refer to the board when you're talking to your staff, and both in a good and a bad way? Because I find, relative to a lot of board meetings, that our board meetings are really interesting strategically. So we do talk about strategy a lot. And I think you're very good at listening to what people are saying. I don't know what you then communicate back, but when you're defining or talking about the strategy, do you say this is something that the board has asked for? Or is the board just something that you deal with? And frankly, below a certain level of management who do present to us, it doesn't matter.
Only if you've done really, or if you've made really stupid mistakes, I can always blame the board. So that's one.
And specific directors, presumably, are blamed in that.
Exactly. No, but joke apart, I think, I'd say less of the board as this kind of probably invisible, dark force that tells us what to do. It's more, we have amazing members in the board that, have a broad view of what's happening outside of the business. And we would be stupid not to listen to that. So I think actually rather saying, look, then we had really good insight from the board meeting where we discussed that and it was shared this. It just gives the whole thing a bit more credibility. That's not just like me coming up with something, but actually there's now a trend in marketing or whatever it might be that we really should be listening to. And as most of the stuff the board says and we discuss makes actually sense, the team also listens to it. So I think it's I think a process based on logic, on number, on data, not just seniority and the loudest person in the room, and that resonates very well with the team.
All right. So actually, Bernhard, I want to touch on two things that you said there, and perhaps we sort of have time for these two questions. One of them was on logic, numbers, data. We had a question here, which it sounds like I know which way you're going to lean to, which was how important is data versus kind of founders' intuition when it comes to decision making? Is it always data, or are there sometimes where you have to rely on some kind of gut feel or intuition?
I mean, I would say, especially in the early days, you have to rely on your gut feel because there might not be even any data available. I mean, when we started and we said we want to teach languages online, there was no online language learning, and therefore we couldn't rely on any data that anyone, is willing to do so. Also, I think like Amazon Prime and a lot of other examples in the world, sometimes market research doesn't really tell you where the consumer money is at the end, because people maybe don't even know it themselves, how they would behave. But then, there are other areas, let's say A/B tests of, let's say, a paywall, where honestly, it doesn't really matter what type of color or font size you like. The data is pretty clear which one converts better, and that's it. But then equally, I would expect from great product managers to create some sort of pattern recognition and gut feel of like what type of experiments should be doing in the first place. I mean, let's not be stupid. Let's not test something that honestly will fail, that doesn't make any sense. Let's not put the door handle the wrong way around and wonder why no one opens the door. I mean, there's like basic things that actually, I think you get better in your craft if you're really good at it. But yeah, we do like to have a lot of data and numbers in our meetings. We like to use that as an analysis, but let's face it, there's always an element of gut feeling and subjectivity.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because it's interpretation of the data as well. It's really difficult to know what is the reason.
Absolutely. Don't trust any Excel sheet you haven't faked yourself. So I think it is really, at the end, it comes down to some sort of feeling, because we're all doing stuff that no one has done before in a certain way. And yeah, there is some element of drive that you need, and hopefully you take the right decisions.
Just to be clear about that Excel sheet that you faked yourself, does Stuart do that for you now, or not?
Yeah.
We'll talk after. Got it. So I guess the last question again touched on not your last response, but the one before, around the faceless board. At an early stage, you're constantly course correcting, the strategy can change, and there's an understanding that it's early stage, and so you're working things out. As you've grown, do you find the acceptance of employees for strategy changing is lowered, and sometimes making a decision might leave employees feeling a bit kind of, what's going on here? Have you found that that's been difficult, or has that been the same throughout?
Really interesting. Well, I would say early stage employees just naturally don't really care that much, because they're the type of people you say, go in this forest and start to build a tent, and they will sleep on the grass in the cold for like 3 nights, and they will eat some leaves and hunt animals. And then maybe if you tell them, well, by the way, not in this direction, but maybe build your tent in the other direction, they're also fine with that. But then in the next iteration of the company, you actually have different type of people who already live in a house, and there's like a little town already built. And if you tell them break down the town and build it somewhere else, that has more disruptions. I think it depends a bit on the stage and type of employees. But as long as there's rationale, there is data to back it up, and you also admit that you might have screwed it up, it's okay. And I'd rather turn around and go in a different direction than running like an idiot off the cliff. And we have recently made some changes in direction because there's new information that came up, and I would also expect employees to accept that and take this actually as a sign of strength, that we also can be wrong, the board can be wrong, founder, CEO can be wrong, the management team can be wrong, we all can be wrong, and it's important to learn. I think, was it Einstein who said it? Something like the real idiot believes that he does the same things and expects a different outcome. So it's exactly that.
But there's an extension there that some of the the bigger you get, employees are kind of more focused on what they're doing. And if they're doing the same thing, and just you've got a different kind of, not different North Star, but a different thing, it doesn't really matter to them. Somebody in marketing is being told that get the clicks which convert at this amount. And then, so long as, I don't know, it's slightly joined up, but so long as that's converting into a LTV that we can all live with, it's kind of okay. And then if we change the LTV target, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to change their jobs.
Cool. Exactly that. But if you suddenly tell them, it's not about clicks anymore, but it's about impression,
yes,
then they might wonder, what has happened? Why has no one told me that? And that's a bit strange. So exactly, I think, but then equally, let's face it, there might also be strategy changes that actually cost people's jobs. Let's face it. And I think those are the more difficult conversations then to be had. But equally, I think you don't want to be in a job that is anyhow not very meaningful and doesn't really have a future. So maybe it's even good for that person that we had to potentially in the past cut and, make organizational changes. Then it's actually good personally, I think, for this person to then potentially move on and do something else in another company than being set in a dead end in a business that has no future, or a segment that has no future. So yeah, I'm an optimist. I always try to see the positive side of things, and change is the only constant when working in a startup. And I think everyone who joins a startup should be willing to accept that.
Actually, I think you've done a great job of keeping the soul of Busuu alive. And the soul is the staff, actually. And so, we've obviously have been through ups and downs with individuals and with strategy, but it's always been a very, very honest approach. And I think that is the thing that's the most important.
Yeah.
Nobody would ever say, sorry, I came in under false pretenses. It was like, we knew what we were getting into, we've enjoyed it, we've changed things, and either we're still there or we've moved on from that.
Exactly.
Right. Well, guys, I'm just looking at the time, and I think that's all we have time for today. We covered a lot of ground, maybe sort of 12, 13 questions. Thanks very much, Bernhard, for taking the time to chat to us today about setting strategy. I know the early stage community will find your responses super useful when they're thinking through what they're doing and the decisions that they have to face.
They absolutely should do. Thanks from me as well, Bernhard, because honestly, it was a learning experience for me. And I'd said before that we were easy to disagree on these things, but I just actually almost kind of just learned. So thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that session. So I hope you find it also useful. Thank you.
Right.